global clients recently asked me to present to their HR leadership team where we see the core challenges for HR. So I presented to them a number of Frazer Jones internal figures and macro figures to paint a picture where I see the state of the HR market. To start the journey, I shared an internal graph, and this graph which you see now shows you the distribution of mandates on an average daily basis we take on throughout a year. And in this very typical graph, which looks pretty much the same every year, we have an increase in activity in Q1. This is typically driven by the client side who have fresh budgets, business plans which they want to enact, and therefore create a hiring need. Q2 is very often driven by the candidate side. This is candidates having decided to take on new career opportunity and therefore creating vacancies which need to be filled. And equally, the market gains momentum because there are a number of people who are typically at this point disappointed with their promotions, bonuses, and so on. You would expect a slowdown over the summer for obvious reasons, and then activity slightly increases in Q4 before falling off in December, as this is typically only half a working month. Now, when you look at 2022, I'm sure we all can agree this is a year fueled by significant uncertainty. We have the war in Ukraine, we have a resulting inflation, we have rising interest rate, slowdown in economy, we are still struggling with COVID in Asia, and many other challenges. So as a result, you would expect a significant slowdown within talent acquisition, both on the agency and recruitment firm side, but also in-house. You would expect the size of talent acquisition teams to be reduced as well. You really typically see that the recruitment industry in itself is a very live trend barometer for what is going on in the economy. But let's look at the graph again, which I earlier showed. You can clearly see that we are outperforming the average daily intake of mandates in Frazer Jones compared to 2021, and this trend is continuing into October. When you then deep dive into Frazer Jones' global portfolio of mandates, you will see that more than 17% of all mandates are talent acquisition related. If you now go to LinkedIn and check out all jobs advertised in relation to HR, you will realize that more than half of these jobs require strong talent acquisition and recruitment skills. After 10 years in London, I live in Amsterdam now. And here in the Netherlands, the figure of talent acquisition related jobs on LinkedIn is over 4,000. Globally, that figure is 192,877 right now. Now, I would call this a market news disconnect, where on the one hand, the news is painting a relatively gloomy picture, but on the other hand, we see a very active client-driven recruitment market. Well, the reason for this is clearly a significant shortage in talent. But why is that the case? To get closer to the answer, I will compare 2 calendar years, 2019, which was the last full year before COVID, and this year, 2022. In 2019, I had lunch with Hein Knapen, the then Chief HR Officer of ING. And Hein said to me, "The war of talent is over and we have all lost." Now, jokingly, and my team here in Amsterdam will understand because I'm a very early bird, I would say right now, even Starbucks doesn't open before 10 a.m. And why do they not open before 10 a.m.? Because they do not have the staff to run the early shift. So why do I feel we have such a shortage of talent? Well, first of all, COVID was undoubtedly a significant economic crisis, but it was a crisis in which governments globally have been in somewhat of a competition, pumping a significant amounts of money into the economy to support businesses. This resulted in a number of businesses coming through this crisis cash positive and having the means to really significantly invest as soon as the COVID lockdown started to fade. COVID undoubtedly had a significant effect on global mobility. Global mobility has collapsed, and I also feel that a significant amount of people moved back home and have not yet returned. COVID also, for many of us, was a period of reflection. And we can see this in early figures that a lot of people not only change jobs, but they also change careers completely or find different priorities in life. COVID will have had a significant impact on mental health. Unfortunately, there are not many figures available, but I'm very confident that we have a significant mental health crisis at the moment, which we need to get significantly more aware about. And last but not least, COVID will have a very negative impact on gender equality, and I will come back on this later. Let's look first at the HR profession in 2022. You would assume if there is a significant shortage in talent, that businesses are investing in HR heavily. And this is clearly shown. On LinkedIn, you will find around 9.8 million people in HR. Around 1.7 million of those have changed their job in the last 12 months. That is 17%. There were points this year where there were more HR positions, in particular talent acquisition positions advertised on LinkedIn than IT positions, a very first in LinkedIn's history. Now, I said earlier that COVID had a significant negative impact on global mobility. Unfortunately, it's quite difficult to get some accurate figures because public figures on migration typically lag quite significantly and are typically 1 to 2 years out of date. When you look at the European Union and mobility within the European Union, there is unfortunately no clear picture, as 2020 was the first year where the UK was not part of the statistics anymore, and it's not quite clear yet where the change in inter-European Union mobility from 2019 to 2020, what of that amount was caused by the UK being out of the statistics and what was actually caused by COVID. What we do now, though, is that immigration into the European Union from outside of the European Union from 2019 to 2020 has dropped by 30%. That alone is 600,000 people less in the market across the European Union. These figures become even more striking when you look at the reduction of workforce within the working age population. On this graph, you can see the labor participation rate out of the working age population by several countries in the OECD and the European Union. You can clearly see that the labor participation rate in the United Kingdom was higher in 2019 than in 2021. That is the same across the entire OECD, and it's the same in the United States. The European Union is the only region which is bucking the trend. Let's dive into these figures in a little bit more detail. Here you can see that across the OECD, the labor participation rate in 2019 was 72.8%, and this has dropped to 71.5% in 2020, and has only recovered to 72.4% in 2021. You can see the figures for the other countries as well. The drop in the UK represents 1.2% of the working age population. At the same time, unemployment in the UK was at 3.9% in 2019 and has been reduced to 3.5% now. In the US, you can see a very similar trend. Whilst the labor participation rate has dropped, unemployment has also fallen from 3.7% in 2019 to 3.5% today. You can therefore conclude that the amount of people who are voluntarily economically inactive has risen. And that would be people who do not work but consider themselves not unemployed and are part of the working age population. This is a significant amount of not available talent in the market for all of us to employ. If you look at the US, for example, and you calculate these figures, so you look at the total working age population in 2019 and the amount of people who participated, and you compare this to the total working age population now and the labor participation rate today, then you can see there are 609,000 people less participating in the market. And the explanation here is not demography, neither is it unemployment. Let's think this through. We had significant school closures, lockdowns, and unfortunately, in many cases, the female population will have taken the brunt of schooling kids from home. This will have drawn significant amounts of female professionals out of the workforce, and they have not yet fully returned. Equally, COVID will have caused a significant mental health crisis, and I'm very confident that a huge part of the not working population out of the figures before do not choose to work for mental health reasons. And lastly, I think COVID has caused for many people to change their life priorities, and they might pursue very different things than a traditional career. One of the questions which was raised is whether we are still in VUCA or whether we're moving to Barney. Well, both acronyms describe the general state And you would say VUCA describes or is described as with volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity, whilst Barney would describe a state which is brittle, anxious, nonlinear, and incomprehensible. Well, I didn't really answer this question because I feel all of these 8 words very well describes, from my personal point of view, this current state of the world, unfortunately. But I wanted to take a different spin on this. If you look at the 14 years I work now for Frazer Jones, there have been 3 major catalysts driving innovation. And that was the global financial crisis, Brexit, and COVID. All of these crises at the same time, while they had significant negative impact on people's life, have also caused significant innovation. Just look at COVID and look at the amount of businesses which have significantly grown through innovation and new products as a direct consequence of COVID. Now looking forward, what would I conclude are the 4 core challenges for HR? Well, for me, they are new work, data, talent management, and diversity, equity, and inclusion. But let's dive into this in a bit more detail. When I say one of the core challenges is new work, for me that would describe how do we actually design the new way of working we have all experimented with since COVID. And the questions we need to answer are the where and when, who, and how. The where and when is all about flexibility models, how we design this new work, hybrid working, remote working, how we drive culture and belonging within that. But there's also more operational topics, because on the one hand, you could argue you can now employ key talent anywhere globally and let them work remotely for you. But practically, that's not that easily possible, especially not if you want to be compliant, because tax legislation, for example, has not caught up yet with these new trends. And outdated legislation doesn't make it easier either. The who is also a very important question. Will the traditional model of full-time employment be the model of the future? Or will you be more building talent pools which rely on internal talent in traditional employment, but you will also have much more flexible external talent pool? Gig economy, for example, would be one of the keywords here. And how would you structure this going forward? The how would be all around organizational design, how you build a learning organization. I will come to this a little later. How do you compensate? What do we actually compensate for? Do we pay still traditionally for hours, or do we pay for output? And again, how do you include automation and artificial intelligence in all of this? Data or people analytics is a big keyword within the HR scene, but I think the reality is a little bit more challenging. The first focus for HR needs to be to actually build the ability to collect and analyze data. Many companies globally still are not able to aggregate data on a global level and to run some really advanced analytics on it. There are various reasons. Technology, legislation around data protection can be a huge stumbling block along this way. When you look at collecting data, on the one hand, that will be external market trend data. And as you saw in my presentation, that can be really difficult because this certain HR relevant external data is lagging in time. Equally, just imagine you can build some really impressive internal data. You would suddenly have potentially a USP because this is data only you have access to. But the first step has to be to create the ability to collect and analyze this data. The next step for me would be to build the ability to understand data. So that would be data literacy, but also tech ability. And I think you really need both. On the one hand, you need people who feel really comfortable with data, who know how data works, who can see correlations and spot trends, but people who are equally in a mindset where they can see where data is simply leading them into a wrong direction. But you also need tech ability, because everything I just said around data requires people who are really comfortable with technology to be actually able to collect and manipulate this data to be able to use it. Talent management is the third pillar in the core challenges I see for HR. And for me, talent management starts with recruitment and ends with alumni management. talent management cannot only cover the people currently working for us. It has to start with recruitment, because that's hiring leaders of the future. And it has to end with alumni management, because people who used to work for all of us are the potential workforce of the future also. So within talent management, I on the one hand would see recruitment, and this is a huge challenge for all of us. We are all struggling to fulfill our hiring needs. And in many businesses globally, growth could be significantly excelled if we could hire more of the talent we so desperately need. External talent is another really important pool here. I think we will see significantly more involvement of external talent, whether that is gig economy, whether that is specialists who on and off work for us in different shapes or form. I would believe that this pool will become a much larger part of our workforces going forward. And that will also match what many generations might want in a different way of working. Development for me would on the one hand be classical development as we all know it. But I think the one key skill every person in every organization needs to develop in the future is still to continuously learn new things, new tasks, new approaches. In an ever faster changing world, ever faster changing markets and market conditions, our organizations need to be able to adapt faster and faster. And so we really finally need to create these learning organizations. Pricewaterhouse launched a global study which is called Global HR Hopes and Fears. In the study, it's really interesting. The majority of businesses are struggling to recruit certain skills, but only the minority of businesses are actually prepared to then hire a lesser skill and develop the needed skill internally. I think we all really need to work on developing the skills which we can't recruit, because the talent shortage will not magically solve itself. So all of us need to really invest in developing skills internally, which we can't recruit externally anymore. I mentioned external talent pools a couple of times. If you work with an external talent pool, you also need to develop that external talent pool. They also need to have training and development, coaching and mentoring as part of their offering. That will require new ways of organizing talent management for these external talent pools, and will be a core task to be considered going forward. And last but not least, we all need to develop that leadership skill for this new way of working. Most of our senior executives have worked their entire career in relatively traditional work setups. Everything is changing, so we also need to change how we develop leadership going forward. We all talk about digitalization in every business, but I think techability along our workforce is really, really low. And I think this is very often the forgotten element of development, that we need to increase the tech ability of our workforce. We need to get people significantly more able and comfortable with technology to really earn the fruits of the investment we do in digitalization across our businesses. And lastly, alumni management is very often not even on the agenda for many businesses. Alumni are former employees who are key leads into the market, potential future clients, and potential returning employees who can bring externally connected expertise back to our businesses. And I think this should be a key part of any talent management and recruitment strategy. And lastly, the fourth pillar for the core challenges in HR, from my point of view, is diversity, equity, and inclusion. Now, this is quite a complex topic. To keep it relatively short, diversity, in most cases, people would understand LGBTQ, race, ethnicity, and gender. I struggle with some of these because diversity implies for many people somewhat a focus on minorities and opportunities, justice for minorities. But the female part of the population is not a minority, nor are non-white people. Whilst this is hugely important to focus on gender equality and true equality across the entire diversity spectrum, I think we really need to start rethinking and challenging each other a little bit more here, and accepting what a reality in the world is, and make sure that reality in the population is reflected into our leadership teams. When I think about equality and equity, I mainly see social mobility as the solution. enabling people to break with their career through social ranks. That could be a modern spin on fair income distribution, and I also think it will be a key challenge to many of our societal problems. We need to ensure that people can break through social ranks with their career. And unfortunately, statistics across Western countries are not very oppressive on this topic. And I would wish that more and more businesses would really put social mobility on the core focus of their DEI's agenda. When I look at DEI, age discrimination is very often forgotten. But I actually think this is a major problem. We, on the one hand, all complain that we can't hire the talent we also desperately need, but still, so many businesses globally very clearly discriminate on age. I think this is a key figure we all need to ask ourselves. How can we bring generations together and use the strength from each generation in a business to really drive our businesses forward? So from my point of view, we are in a market of significant opportunity. Any crisis creates opportunity. But the challenge we all face, we need key talent and the right talent to take this opportunity and turn it into success. And therefore, the core challenges for HR are clearly to design a new way of work, to have the right data to steer our businesses and strategies, to manage talent from recruitment to alumni management, and to have a core focus on DEI, and with that, not only lift the diversity of our own organizations, but have a major impact on society. Many thanks.